Greetings everyone, this is Omni-Wizard. Prepare yourselves for what if Harry Potter was trained by the Justice League to destroy Voldemort. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Watchtower sees everything. The Goblet of Fire had been burning blue for 3 days. It sat in the center of the Great Hall on a raised wooden platform, cordoned off by a thin golden line that Dumbledore had drawn across the stone floor with the tip of his wand. The age line, he'd called it, with that particular smile he wore when he thought something was clever. Anyone under 17 who crossed it would be bounced back. Simple, elegant. A bit theatrical, Fred and George had discovered when they'd both gone sailing across the hall simultaneously and landed in identical heaps, their beards suddenly long and ginger and spectacular. Harry hadn't laughed as hard as everyone else had. He'd watched, sure, and smiled because Ron was nearly crying with it, but there was something sitting in his chest that day that made laughter feel like it was coming from a long way off. The something was still there 4 days later when he sat at breakfast and pushed eggs around his plate and listened to Cedric Diggory talk about the tournament like it was the most natural thing in the world to want to enter a competition where people had died. "You're not eating," Hermione said without looking up from Hogwarts, a history which she'd already read 4 times but apparently had found new material in. "You've been not eating since Monday." "I eat." "You push those eggs to the left side of your plate, then to the right, then back to the left. That's not eating, that's rearranging." Ron looked up from his own plate. His notably was empty. "She's been watching your eggs this whole time. Bit odd that." "I've been watching him," Hermione said, closing the book with a precise snap. "Harry, what's wrong?" The Great Hall was loud around them. Tournament talk, school rivalries, the Beauxbatons girls causing a minor riot every time they walked past the Gryffindor table. Normal October morning at Hogwarts. Harry looked at the goblet on its platform and thought about the way the blue flames moved, not like fire at all really, more like something breathing. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "I just don't have a good feeling about this tournament." "You don't have a good feeling about most things," Ron pointed out, reaching across to steal a piece of Harry's toast. "Part of your charm, mate." Hermione looked like she wanted to say more. She usually did. But the morning moved on and breakfast ended and the day ground forward the way days do when something is coming that you can't quite name. The goblet made its choice that evening. Harry was there when it happened, standing in the back of the crowd with his arms folded, watching the blue light shift and deepen as Dumbledore called the hall to silence. Victor Krum came first, Durmstrang erupted, Karkaroff looked smug. Fleur de Lacquer second, Beauxbatons broke into graceful applause, their headmistress nodding like she'd expected nothing less. Cedric Diggory third, Hufflepuff went absolutely mental, yellow scarves waving, stomping that shook the floor. Harry clapped. Cedric was a good person. He deserved it. Then the goblet flared, not the steady glow it had kept for 3 days. A violent, lurching burst of flame, deep red-orange, nothing like the blue at all. The parchment that shot out was charred at the edges and spinning slowly as it fell, and Dumbledore caught it the way you catch something you don't understand but can't afford to drop. He read it once. Then he read it again. The hall had gone very quiet in that particular way that only happens when several hundred people all stop breathing at the same moment. "Harry Potter," Dumbledore said. The silence lasted exactly 2 more seconds. Then it exploded. Harry didn't move. He stood in the back of the crowd and felt every head in the hall turn toward him, and he thought, with the particular clarity that only comes in moments of genuine shock, not again. The champion's room was a side chamber off the Great Hall, stone-walled and lit by a handful of floating candles. Krum stood against one wall with his arms crossed, radiating a sullen kind of dignity. Fleur was examining her nails. Cedric kept looking at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite getting there. Harry sat in a chair and waited. They came in waves. Ludo Bagman, round and beaming, talking about an extraordinary turn of events. Karkaroff barely contained fury, pointing fingers and demanding explanations. Madame Maxime with her considerable height and her considerable silences. Then Dumbledore, calm as a deep lake, and beside him McGonagall, who was not calm at all. "He's 14, McGonagall said, and in all of Harry's years at Hogwarts he had never heard that particular note in her voice before, not anger exactly. Something rower than anger. "The goblet has spoken," Bagman said, still grinning, as though this were a delightful plot twist in a game he was running. "Binding magical contract, the boy must compete." "He didn't enter," McGonagall said. "Nevertheless, I didn't enter," Harry said. The room went quiet. He hadn't raised his voice. He just said it plainly, the way you state a fact you're entirely certain of, and something about the flatness of it cut through the bureaucratic noise in the room and made several adults look at him like they were seeing him properly for the first time tonight. "I know you didn't, Harry," Dumbledore said. He was looking at Harry with those blue eyes that always seemed to be doing 2 things at once, looking at you and looking past you at the same time. "Did you ask an older student to put your name in?" Do you have any idea who might have done this? Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the enemies he had, real ones, not schoolyard ones. He thought about last year, the Dementors, the rat that wasn't a rat, the man on the full moon. He thought about a name whispered in his scar's language. No, he said again, but whoever did it didn't do it to give me a prize. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. No, he said quietly, I don't believe they did. 3 floors above the Great Hall, in a corridor that didn't exist on any map Filch had ever made, something was happening that had nothing to do with Hogwarts politics or magical contracts, or a 14-year-old boy sitting in a stone room feeling the particular weight of being chosen for something he didn't ask for. A vertical tier appeared in the air. Not a door. Not a portal with any of the usual magical signatures, no shimmer of flu, no crack of disapparition. This was something else entirely. The air itself came apart at a seam, and cold light spilled through it. And from the other side came the hum of technology so advanced it had nothing to say to the medieval stonework around it. A figure stepped through. He was tall, dressed in black so complete that the shadows seemed to extend him rather than fall on him. No cape here, he'd left that behind because capes were for statements and this was reconnaissance. A cowl pulled back, a face that gave nothing away, eyes doing precisely what they always did, cataloging everything. Bruce Wayne took 3 steps into the corridor of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and stood very still. He'd been still for about 45 seconds when a cat appeared at the far end of the corridor. It sat down and looked at him with square pupils and a distinctly unimpressed expression. Bruce looked back at it. I'm going to need to speak to whoever's in charge of security, he said. The cat blinked. Then it stretched, stood, and walked away, tail up, with the air of something that had decided to make this someone else's problem. The watchtower had picked up the signal 6 hours ago. Jayon had found it first, of course he had. The Martian Manhunter experienced the world through spectrums of sensation that the rest of the League was still developing instruments to measure. And what he'd felt coming through the dimensional analysis array wasn't a reading he had language for yet. He'd stood at the console for a long time, perfectly still the way he always was when something was genuinely puzzling him, and then he'd called Bruce. It's magical, Bruce had said, looking at the data. Obviously, Jayon said, we've detected magical energy signatures before, small ones, ambient. This is not ambient. He'd pulled up the overlay, a topographical map of southeastern England, one location pulsing like a slow heartbeat. And beneath it, threaded through it like a signature written in a language Bruce was only beginning to understand, a specific configuration of energy that the Watchtower's records had filed under one entry. Godric's Hollow Incident, 1981. Unknown classified monitor. Bruce had stared at that file for a long time. They detected the 1981 event retrospectively, picked it up in historical dimensional scans when they'd been mapping energy anomalies across Earth Prime's timeline. A burst of something so concentrated and so specific that it had left a scar in the fabric of the local dimension, a scar that had until tonight been dormant. It's the same source, Bruce said. Yes, the same child. Jayon had been quiet for a moment that wasn't really a pause. It was the Martian equivalent of choosing words with care. The same person, he'd said. He would be 14 now. Clark had been leaning against the far wall, arms folded, doing the thing he did where he pretended he wasn't already thinking 3 steps ahead. So what do we do? Bruce had already been reaching for his equipment. We go, he said, and we listen first. Diana had come too, because Diana always came when the word war was anywhere near the situation, even unspoken, and whatever was happening at that school in Scotland had the shape of something that was building toward war. Barry had tried to come, and Bruce had told him to wait in reserve. Arthur had shrugged and said he had a tidal issue near the Azores anyway. Jayon had come because the energy signature was, in his words, calling in a way he wasn't comfortable ignoring. They'd crossed through a dimensional bridge Bruce had been quietly developing for 18 months, based on the 1981 readings, and come out in a corridor that smelled of torch smoke and old stone and something else, something Jayon had breathed in and then stood very still for a full minute processing. There is grief in this building, he'd said quietly to no one in particular. Old grief, layered. School, Bruce had said, children, yes, but also Jayon had paused again, one that is much louder than the others, much more recent, and much more complicated. They found Dumbledore in his office, which required walking through a significant portion of the castle, and past a portrait of a knight who challenged Bruce to single combat and took his polite decline as a personal insult. The gargoyle at the base of the moving staircase had been less of an obstacle than expected. Diana had looked at it with the calm patience of someone who had faced actual monsters, and the gargoyle had apparently made a judgment call. The office itself was extraordinary. Bruce had been in extraordinary rooms before. Wayne Manor had its share, and the Batcave was objectively remarkable, but this was extraordinary in a living way, crowded with instruments that ticked and spun and breathed, portraits that watched them with uncanny awareness. A phoenix on a perch that studied Diana with something that looked like recognition. The old man behind the desk was not what Bruce had expected. He'd done his research in the 6 hours between detecting the signal and crossing over, which meant he'd done considerable research. Because 6 hours was a long time when you had the Watchtower's processing capability and an absolute refusal to walk into any situation uninformed. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster, Supreme Mugwump, Chief Warlock, Defeater of Grindelwald, a man whose resume read like a greatest hits album of a century's worth of magical history. The man behind the desk had half-moon spectacles and a long silver beard and kind eyes, and he looked at the 4 of them standing in his office, Batman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, 4 figures that had come through a hole in the world, and he said, perfectly pleasantly, "I was wondering when you might arrive." Bruce said, "You knew we were here." Mrs. Norris reported an intruder, and Minerva's animagus form is considerably more observant than most people account for. A small smile. Besides, the castle wards registered your entry. They don't know what to make of you, I'm afraid. You're not precisely magical, and you're not precisely not. It's been causing the more sensitive instruments quite a lot of distress. He gestured at a nearby device that was, in fact, emitting a thin stream of smoke and a sound like a kettle with opinions. Please. Sit. They sat, except Bruce, who stood. Because Bruce always stood when he wanted to maintain an information advantage, and he had no idea yet how much of one he actually had. "The signal your castle is generating," Bruce said. "We've been monitoring a dimensional anomaly from this location since 1981. Tonight it spiked at levels that suggest an active catalyst rather than residual energy. The source is a specific magical signature we've tracked to one individual." Dumbledore looked at him over the spectacles. "Harry," he said. "Harry Potter," Bruce confirmed. "We need to understand what's happening." The old man was quiet for a moment, not caught off guard, Bruce noted, but choosing. He was very good at it, the choosing. The careful architecture of what to share and what to file behind the kindness in his eyes. "Something happened tonight," Dumbledore said finally, "that has placed Harry in considerable danger. He's been entered into a magical competition by someone who means him harm. The competition at its most benign is physically perilous. Under these circumstances," he paused, "under these circumstances it is likely designed as a vehicle to reach him." "Reach him how?" Another pause, longer this time. "There is a darkness returning to our world," Dumbledore said. "A darkness that has been waiting for 13 years. Harry is central to its plans in ways that are complex." Jayon, who had been silent since entering the room, spoke. "You are protecting him," he said. "But you are also using him." It wasn't an accusation. Jayon never made accusations. He stated what he read with the calm of someone reporting a weather pattern. Something moved in Dumbledore's eyes. "I am doing what I believe is necessary." "There is a difference," Jayon said, "between what is necessary and what is convenient for the one making the plan." The silence in the office was very particular after that. One of the portraits of a former headmaster cleared his throat and looked pointedly at the ceiling. Diana leaned forward. She'd been watching Dumbledore with the focused attention of a woman who had been reading the politics of great men for 3,000 years. "We want to speak to the boy," she said, simply. Not a request exactly, not a demand, something in between that left very little room for navigation. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Bruce. Then he did something that Bruce had not expected. He looked tired. Actually tired in a way the pleasantness and the half-moon spectacles had been sitting on top of. "He's in the champion's antechamber," he said. "He'll be finished with the officials shortly." A pause. "I would ask that you will be careful," Bruce said. Dumbledore nodded slowly. "That isn't quite what I was going to ask." He folded his hands on the desk. "I was going to ask that you listen to him before you decide anything. He has a way of the tiniest smile. He has a way of making decisions for himself, even when larger forces would prefer otherwise." Bruce looked at him. "Good," he said. Harry was alone in the antechamber when Bruce found him. The others had gone, Cedric back to Hufflepuff celebrations, Fleur and Crumb to their respective schools, the adults to their various meetings and recriminations. The candles had burned lower. Harry was sitting in the same chair, not doing anything, which was different from the restless nothing he'd been doing at breakfast. This was deliberate stillness. The kind of stillness that happens when a person has decided to wait out the chaos rather than run into it. Bruce came through the door and closed it quietly behind him. Harry looked up. He registered the figure, tall, dark clothes, no wizard robes, no magical paraphernalia of any kind, and his hand moved to his pocket where his wand was before he'd consciously decided to do it. Fast, Bruce noted. The instinct was already there. "I'm not from your ministry," Bruce said. He didn't move further into the room. He'd learned early that with people who'd been through real threats, distance was the first courtesy. I'm not from any institution you know. My name is Bruce Wayne. Harry stared at him. You came in through the door, he said. Yes, there's a corridor full of Aurors and ministry officials out there. There was, Bruce said. They're having a very involved conversation about jurisdiction. I walked past them. Something shifted in Harry's expression, not quite amusement, but the shape of it. You walked past them. People in the middle of arguments about bureaucracy don't look up. He paused. Usually. Harry's hand was still near his wand, but it hadn't moved to take it out. He was reading Bruce the way someone reads a situation they haven't seen before and aren't sure if it's a threat or something else. Good instincts, Bruce thought. Actually very good. What do you want? Harry asked, not rude, just direct. The question of someone who has learned that people who come to him generally want something. To talk. About what? About the fact that someone put your name in that cup on purpose and the purpose wasn't good and you already know both of those things. Bruce moved to a chair across from him and sat down slowly, so the movement was readable, nothing sudden. And about the energy signature your magic left on the dimensional record 13 years ago in Godric's Hollow. The stillness went out of Harry completely. Not fear, something sharper than fear. Recognition. You know about Godric's Hollow, he said. I know about an event in Godric's Hollow in 1981 that left a scar on the fabric of local spacetime that my instruments have been monitoring ever since. And I know that tonight, the same signature activated again, centered on you. He held Harry's gaze. Something is coming, something significant enough to break through dimensional barriers just by existing, and you're at the center of it. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very carefully, Who are you? I told you, Bruce Wayne. That doesn't mean anything to me. I know, but my colleagues and I detected what's happening here and we came to understand it. And possibly to help if that's something you want. He paused. The help isn't conditional on any particular outcome. We're not here to manage you. We're here because the scale of what's building requires more than what you currently have access to. Harry looked at him with those green eyes that were considerably older than 14 in ways that had nothing to do with maturity and everything to do with experience. You're not a wizard, he said. You're not magic. Not in the way you mean. Then what are you? Bruce considered for a moment, several answers. The honest one was the simplest. Someone who lost everything when he was very young, he said, and decided to become something that could make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. It didn't entirely work, but the decision still shaped everything that came after. Harry stared at him. Something moved across his face, not quite softness, but the place where softness lives when it's been pressed down for a long time and suddenly recognizes itself in an unexpected mirror. How many of you are there? Harry asked. Tonight, 4. And you can, what, fight? Magic doesn't work on muggles the same way. It's worked on me so far tonight, Bruce said, about as well as anything else does. Which is not particularly well. A pause that might have been, on a different face, the beginning of a smile. I have a colleague who's essentially indestructible, one who's been alive for 3,000 years and trained in combat for most of them, one who reads minds. Harry blinked. Reads minds? Not invasively. He's careful and he wants to meet you. He says your magical signature is doing something he hasn't encountered before and it's been bothering him since we arrived. For the first time since Bruce had walked in the door, Harry looked something adjacent to curious rather than wary. What's it doing? He said. Bruce paused because Jaon's exact words had been precise in a way that resisted translation. He said it sounds like a door that's been locked from the inside by someone who doesn't know they're holding the key. The room was quiet. Somewhere outside, the Triwizard officials were still arguing. The candles had burned another quarter-inch. Dumbledore knows you're here, Harry asked. We spoke to him, he's not obstructing us. But, Bruce acknowledged the but. He has a plan. He's had one for some time. We're not part of it, which means we complicate it. A pause. I don't think his plan is bad. I think it's incomplete. Harry looked at him for a long, careful moment. Then he stood up, decisive, like a question had been asked internally and answered, and said, All right, show me. Diana was in the corridor. Harry had expected, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Something dramatic, maybe, something that announced itself. What he got was a woman standing in the torchlight of a Hogwarts corridor, arms loose at her sides, wearing what looked like modern traveling clothes. And the first thing he noticed was that she was watching the portraits on the wall with genuine interest, and the portraits were watching her back with what could only be described as reverence. She turned when she heard them and Harry met her eyes, and there was something about her gaze, not intimidating exactly, more like being seen very clearly by someone who does it without judgment, that made him stand up straighter without meaning to. Harry Potter, she said, her voice was warm and direct. Diana. Right, Harry said. Hi. One of the portraits, Sir Cadogan, who had been eavesdropping enthusiastically since the corridor, leaned out of his frame. A warrior, he announced. I can always tell you have the bearing, my lady. Diana looked at him with a smile that was entirely genuine. Thank you, you have a very fine sword. Sir Cadogan nearly fell off his painted horse. Jaeon was further down the corridor, standing very still, which Harry had already learned was just how Jaeon stood. He was tall and broad, and there was something about him that existed slightly sideways from the physical space he occupied, not threatening but undeniable. He looked at Harry when Harry approached and said nothing for a moment. Then, "The locked door," he said in a voice that was low and resonant and came from somewhere deep. "It is louder up close." "What does that mean?" Harry asked. "It means," Jaeon said carefully, "that you have been using approximately, perhaps 30% of what you are capable of. Not because you are untalented, but because something is held back. Something chose to hold back at a very young age and has not been given a reason to stop." Harry thought about the Dursleys. About the way accidental magic had always felt dangerous, had always come with consequences, had always been the thing that made him wrong in a house where being wrong was punished. He didn't say any of that. But Jaeon heard it anyway, not as words, but as a shape, an old architecture of learned restraint, and he simply nodded once slowly, like a confirmation of something he'd suspected. "I won't look without permission," Jaeon said. "I want you to know that." "Okay," Harry said. He meant it. There was something about the straightforwardness of it that cut through 14 years of people who hadn't said that. "There's someone else," Diana said. She was watching Harry with the calm attention she'd been giving everything in the castle, systematic, interested, missing nothing. "He's outside." He wanted to wait. "Outside," he said. He didn't want to overwhelm a small, enclosed space. "Accurate, I think." They went through a side door and down a short passage that led out onto the grounds. And the night hit Harry, October cold, the lake gleaming black under a half-moon, the castle lit up behind them, and the forbidden forest a dark mass to the west. Standing at the edge of the path, looking out at the lake with his hands in his jacket pockets, was a man so large he made the outdoors feel slightly more indoor than usual. He turned around when he heard them, and he had one of those faces that looked like it had been specifically designed to be impossible to feel threatened by, open and warm and faintly apologetic about its own dimensions. "Hey," Clark Kent said to Harry Potter. "I've been wanting to meet you since 1981. "Sorry it took this long." Harry stared at him. "You've known about me since 1981. We detected the event retrospectively." He paused. "I did some math, worked out roughly how old you'd be now. I've been well. Bruce told me I was catastrophizing. He was probably right." "He was definitely right," Bruce said from behind Harry. "You've been worried about me," Harry said. He couldn't quite keep the strangeness of it out of his voice. "For 13 years you don't know me." "I know what the readings looked like," Clark said. "I know what happened to your parents. And I know that you're 14 years old and someone just used an ancient magical contract to put you in harm's way." His voice was level and warm and completely honest. "I know enough." Harry stood in the cold October night and looked at 4 people who had come through a hole in the world because a sensor had gone off and an old record had matched a new event, and something moved in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Maybe ever. Not safety. Nothing in Harry's life had ever properly felt like safety, but something close to it, the ghost of the shape of it. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Right now, nothing," Diana said. "Tonight we want you to sleep." Tomorrow we start," Bruce said. "Start what?" Bruce looked at him steadily. "Making sure that whoever put your name in that cup regrets it comprehensively." Harry held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once the way Jaeon had nodded, a simple, solid thing. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow." He went back into the castle, and the 4 of them stood on the grounds in the October dark, and Jaeon looked up at the stars that were different from Martian stars and Earth-ocean stars and the stars seen from a watchtower in high orbit, and he said quietly, "He is going to surprise all of us." "I know," Bruce said. "Are you ready for that?" Bruce looked at the castle, at the lit windows and the ancient stones and the centuries of something built on good intentions that had, like all things built on good intentions without enough structural honesty, accumulated cracks. "Ask me again in a week," he said. Diana smiled at the night. "He reminds me of you," she said to Bruce. "No, he doesn't." The way he stood up the moment he decided, the stillness before it. "He doesn't," Bruce said more firmly, not convincingly. Jaeon said nothing, because Jaeon very rarely said things that didn't need to be said. But across the distance and the cold air and the dimensional gap between one world and another, he heard something in Bruce's mind that was quiet and careful and very old. It sounded something like, "Don't let it happen again." And beneath it, something newer, something forming for the first time in 13 years of a file-marked monitor. "Don't let it happen to him." Above them, the castle held its breath. The Goblet of Fire had gone dark in the Great Hall, its work done, its fire spent. In a dormitory tower, Harry Potter lay in his bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like tomorrow might be worth the getting to. The watchtower had seen everything, but what came next was something not even its instruments could measure. Chapter 2, What Soldiers Are Made of. The room didn't exist on any map. Bruce had found it on his second pass through the castle's lower corridors. A chamber behind a tapestry of a one-eyed witch that responded not to magic, but to a very specific sequence of pressure points on the stone wall beside it, which Bruce had worked out through structural analysis, and the reasonable assumption that secret rooms in old buildings always have mechanical triggers that predate the magical ones layered over them. The room itself was long and vaulted and completely empty, which was precisely what he needed. Jaeon had expanded it, not magically or not in the way Hogwarts understood magic. Jaeon's ability to phase through matter extended under sufficient concentration to a kind of spatial reasoning that let him push the walls of a place outward through the rock around it, creating volume without excavation. The castle's wards had registered this with approximately the same alarm as a building experiencing a very mild tremor, and then decided it wasn't their problem. By 5 in the morning, the room was the size of a Quidditch pitch, lit by portable lighting rigs Bruce had brought through the dimensional bridge, and Diana was standing in the center of it testing the floor with her boot. "Solid," she said. "Stones about 4 meters thick in each direction," Bruce said, not looking up from the tablet he was working from. "We won't need to worry about structural noise carrying." "What about magical detection?" Jaeon was sitting cross-legged in one corner, eyes closed, doing what he called listening and what the rest of them understood as a full-spectrum scan of the surrounding area. "There is a teacher," he said, without opening his eyes. "2 floors up, she is awake and she knows something is different about the lower corridors, but she attributes it to the castle settling. She will not investigate." A pause. "The portraits in this section do not extend here. We are private." "Good." Bruce set down the tablet. "He'll be here at 6. "You told him 6. "I told him dawn." Diana looked at him with the patient expression of someone who knew exactly what Bruce Wayne meant when he said dawn versus what he meant when he said 6 in the morning, and understood that they were not the same thing and that only one of them would tell you something useful. At 5:10, the tapestry moved. Harry came through it already dressed, wand tucked in his jacket, shoes tied, and carrying 2 cups of something hot that steamed in the cool room air. He stopped when he saw the size of the space, took it in the way he took most things, a quick comprehensive read of the room, cataloging exits and distances before anything else, and then held out one of the cups toward whoever was closest, which was Diana. "Didn't know what everyone took," he said. "So I got tea, figured it was probably universal." Diana accepted it with a smile. "It's perfect. Why are you all already here?" "We don't sleep much," Bruce said. Harry looked at him. "Any of you?" "Some of us more than others," Clark said, coming through a side passage. Bruce had cut through the stone last night. He was carrying somehow an entire conjured-looking bench which he set down with the carefulness of someone consciously not using their full strength. "Diana averages about 4 hours. "I sleep fine," Bruce said. "Bruce sleeps when the threat analysis tells him to." Clark sat on the bench, which did not creak under him. "Jaeon doesn't need sleep the same way we do." "I could probably go without, but it makes me irritable." He paused. "More irritable." "You're never irritable," Diana said. "Tell that to Bruce on a Tuesday." Harry was watching this exchange with the expression of someone recalibrating what they thought they'd walked into. He'd expected perhaps something more structured, more formal. He'd spent the previous night lying awake constructing expectations, and the room in front of him was not matching any of them. "So," he said, "what are we doing?" Bruce pulled up the tablet and turned it so Harry could see the screen. A cascade of data, dimensional readings, event timelines. Cross-referenced against what Harry assumed was every piece of information the League had been able to compile on the wizarding world in the approximately 8 hours since they'd arrived. "The tournament has 3 tasks," Bruce said. "First task is in 3 weeks. We don't know what it is yet, but historically these tasks involve direct physical danger. Someone entered you specifically. That means the tasks as designed aren't the primary threat, they're the delivery mechanism for whoever's actually after you." "Voldemort," Harry said. He said it the way he always said it, flatly, without the flinch that made most wizards around him nervous. Bruce noticed this, filed it. "You say that name like you've spent time deciding to," Bruce said. "I have. Dumbledore told me people who are afraid of a name give power to the thing behind it." A beat. "I thought it was decent advice." "It is," Diana said. "Names are the first armor." "The person behind the name," Bruce said, returning to the point because he always returned to the point. "Tell me what you know about him, not the mythology, what you know." Harry pulled up a chair. There was a chair now because the room kept providing things as though the castle was making decisions about it, and sat forward with his elbows on his knees and talked. He was a better analyst than he knew, Bruce thought. The information came out in the right order, most critical first, then supporting detail, with a clear instinct for which things were known facts and which things were his own inference. He talked about the diary in second year, which had been a piece of Voldemort's soul. He talked about the Philosopher's Stone and Quirrell. He talked about the graveyard vision he'd been having in his scar for the past year. He talked about Wormtail Peter Pettigrew alive working for Voldemort, which meant Voldemort was somewhere with a servant capable of taking action. When he was done, the room was quiet except for the hum of Bruce's equipment. Soul fragment, Jayon said. He'd opened his eyes sometime during the telling. He divided his soul. Deliberately, Harry confirmed, put pieces of it into objects to anchor himself to life. Dumbledore calls them Horcruxes. He thinks there are more than one. How many? He doesn't know, neither do I. Harry's jaw tightened slightly. He hasn't exactly told me much. I found out about the diary one because I stabbed it with a basilisk fang. A silence. A basilisk, Clark said carefully. You were 12, second year, you stabbed it. The fang, the diary I mean, to kill the memory of Voldemort inside it. Harry seemed to notice the quality of the silence around him and frowned slightly. Was that not the right approach? It was extremely effective, Diana said, and her voice had something in it that was not quite pride but was built from the same material. How did you get the fang? I pulled the sword of Godric Gryffindor out of a hat, Harry said, and then to his own evident surprise he laughed, brief and genuine and startled out of him by the absurdity of saying it out loud. A sorting hat, it just appeared because I asked for help. Clark looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Clark. The look said several things, the primary one being, this child is extraordinary and neither of us is going to say that out loud. All right, Bruce said, here's what happens now. 3 weeks before the first task, we use that time. He stood up, which on Bruce had the effect of a meeting formally beginning. Diana works with you physically, combat, movement, stamina. Jayon works with your magic, specifically on removing the constraints. Clark and I work on intelligence and strategy. By the time the first task arrives, you should be operating at full capacity instead of the fraction you're currently using. Harry absorbed this. Then he said with the carefully neutral tone of someone who has been trained by repeated disappointment to not expect too much, you think you can do all that in 3 weeks? I think you can, Bruce said. We're just the conditions that make it possible. Harry looked at him for a moment, then he stood up too. Okay, he said, where do we start? Diana stood up, set down the tea and smiled. You trying to hit me, she said. He couldn't hit her. He'd known going in that he couldn't hit her theoretically, the same way you know theoretically that you can't outrun a car, but theory and practice have a considerable gap between them, and for the first 10 minutes Harry's brain kept insisting that if he was fast enough, creative enough, unpredictable enough. Stop thinking about where you want to hit, Diana said. She wasn't breathing hard. She hadn't been breathing hard since they'd started. She deflected his third attempt with her forearm and redirected his momentum so smoothly he found himself 3 steps past her before he'd registered moving. You're projecting. Your body moves before you decide, which is good instinct. Your eyes telegraph it, which removes the advantage. Harry turned around. His jacket was on the floor somewhere. His hair was worse than usual. My eyes telegraph. Most people's do. You look at the target just before you commit. She beckoned him forward. Come again, but this time don't look at me. How do I not look at you when you're what I'm trying to? Look at the space around me, the negative space where I am not. Harry tried it. He came forward and instead of looking at Diana, he let his eyes go slightly unfocused, taking in the whole picture rather than the specific target, and something clicked. He caught the shift of her weight before her arm moved and pulled his approach sideways and didn't hit her, but came significantly closer than any of the previous attempts, close enough that Diana's deflection was a real deflection rather than a simple redirect. She stepped back and gave him a look that meant something. Better. I didn't actually hit you, number, but you made me work. That is not nothing. She circled him slowly. You've been in fights before, a few. Real ones, not sparring. It wasn't a question. Yeah, how did they go? Harry thought about it honestly. A troll in a girl's bathroom, first year, bludgeoning it with its own club, quarrel in the 3rd floor corridor, the basilisk, Dementors on a Quidditch pitch, Sirius's name which had launched him across a room before he'd made a conscious decision to move. I mostly win, he said, but not neatly. Survival isn't neat, Diana said. But there is a difference between winning by surviving and winning by deciding. The first leaves everything to chance and your own stubbornness. The second means you are never at the mercy of the situation. She stopped circling. You are stubborn enough to survive almost anything. I want to make you precise enough to end things before survival becomes the question. She came at him then, not fast, not at full capacity. Harry understood that in some cellular, self-preserving part of his brain, but fast enough that his wand was out of his pocket before he'd consciously drawn it, and she caught his wrist not hard enough to break anything but firmly enough to stop it completely, and she said, Not yet. The wand is not your first answer. It can be an answer. But if it is always the first one, anyone who knows you will come for your wand hand. Harry looked at his wand hand, held still in her grip, and thought about Expelliarmus and how many times in his life the loss of his wand had left him completely without recourse. Right, he said. She released him. Again. They went for 2 hours. By the end of it, Harry's knuckles were scraped and his ribs had met the floor a number of times, and there was a new kind of ache in his shoulders that came from being shown, repeatedly and patiently, exactly how he habitually moved wrong. But he'd also landed 2 clean hits, real ones, both of which Diana had taken without giving ground, both of which had made her smile in the specific way that meant she was actually pleased, and he'd disarmed her once, which had surprised him almost as much as it had surprised Clark, who had been watching from the edge of the room with his arms folded and an expression of quietly delighted shock. "She let you do that," Bruce said from his corner. "She did not," Clark said. "I was watching." Diana rolled her shoulder once, flexed her fingers, and said to Harry, "Your instincts are genuinely excellent. You read movement like someone who has been in real danger enough times that their body learned the patterns automatically." A pause. "We're going to make those instincts deliberate. What your body already knows, your mind will learn to direct." She handed him back his wand. "Tomorrow we start integrating both." Harry looked at the wand in his hand and then at Diana and said, "You've been fighting for 3,000 years, give or take, and you're still improving, still learning." She looked at him with an expression that was both ancient and completely present. "The day I stop learning," she said, "is the day I have become a statue. Statues look impressive. They also get very slowly destroyed by weather." Jayon waited until the afternoon. He'd watched the morning's work from the far corner with the same stillness he always had, and Harry had grown accustomed enough to his presence by then to stop registering him as a threat, which Jayon noted as a good sign. Harry's threat assessment was functioning. It simply required clear evidence of non-hostility rather than deliberate reassurance. When Diana and Harry finished, and Clark handed Harry a water bottle from somewhere and Diana went to find Bruce, Jayon crossed the room and settled into a sitting position near the wall. He waited for Harry to drop down beside him before he spoke. "How does your magic feel right now?" he asked. Harry considered the question. "Like there's more of it moving than usual. When I was fighting with Diana at the end, something came loose. The spell when I disarmed her was stronger than you intended." Harry blinked. "You felt that?" "I experienced the ambient signature. Yes, it was much more than a standard expelliarmus." Jayon's dark eyes were patient and enormously attentive. "This is what I mean by the locked door. The physical engagement loosens something. Physical extremity, genuine stakes, has always been a trigger for your magic operating at higher capacity." "The troll," Harry said, almost to himself. "Second year. The basilisk. When survival is genuinely in question, the restriction comes off, but this means you have been living in a world where the majority of your magical capability only becomes available when you are at your most desperate." Jayon paused. "This is not sustainable. It is also not fair to you." Harry said nothing, but something in the lines of his face did. "I want to try something," Jayon said. "With your permission, I will not read your thoughts. I want to sit near your, I suppose the word in your language is aura, your magical field, and listen to it. The way you might listen to a piece of music to understand where the notes are held back." "And then what?" "And then I will tell you what I find. You will decide what to do with it." Harry thought about it. He'd given Dumbledore his trust largely because Dumbledore had been the first adult to seem genuinely interested in his well-being and had filled a gap that had been empty since before he could remember. The trust was real, but the architecture of it was, Harry was beginning to understand in ways he couldn't quite articulate yet, built on Dumbledore's terms. On Dumbledore's timeline. On a plan that Harry was part of rather than party to, Jayon was asking permission, and he was asking in a way that made clear the answer could be number. "All right," Harry said. "Yeah, go ahead." Jayon closed his eyes. What happened next was not dramatic, nothing visibly changed. No lights, no visible energy, no magical display. Harry sat against the wall and felt slowly like a tide rather than a wave, a kind of warmth that began in his chest and expanded outward, not invasive, not a presence in his mind. More like the difference between sitting in a cold room and someone quietly lighting a fire in the corner. The warmth didn't change anything. It just made something that had been contracted begin to consider expanding. Jayon was quiet for a long time, then he said, "There is a memory, age 4 or 5. You did something I can't see what, only the shape of it, and there was a response that frightened you, not the magic, the response to it." He opened his eyes. "You taught yourself to be small, magically small. Before you came to Hogwarts, you had already spent years learning to make yourself as invisible as possible, and your magic learned that lesson with you." Harry's voice was very even. "The Dursleys. They punished accidental magic. They didn't know it was magic, they just knew it was wrong." "That I was wrong," he paused. "Freakish was the specific word." Jayon looked at him with something in his expression that Harry couldn't name yet but would recognize, later, as grief, not pity, which Harry hated and could spot immediately, but the specific grief of someone who has experienced a version of the same erasure and recognizes its shape in another person. "You are not small," Jayon said. It was simply said, not inspirationally, just as a statement of observable fact. "And you have not been for some time, but there is still a mechanism." A learned reflex. It kicks in before you are conscious of it and compresses what you are capable of. He paused. I believe I can help you dismantle it, not all at once, but we can begin. How? Honestly. The physical training is already helping. Diana is correct that the body and the magic are not separate systems, but there is also I want you to try something. He shifted slightly. I want you to cast something, anything you like, don't think about what result you want, don't moderate it, just let it go, whatever the first thing is. Harry lifted his wand. He thought for half a second about what to cast and then stopped thinking and let his hand decide. The spell that came out of him was Lumos, the most basic magic he knew, first-year stuff, a small point of light, and it was not small. It filled the room like a torch had become a sun for a single white-hot moment before Harry yanked it back instinctively, and the stone walls threw back the light and the shadows and Harry sat blinking in the aftermath. The silence held for a moment. Right, Harry said. His voice was very slightly unsteady. You contained it immediately, Jayon said. Reflex. Even as you were releasing it, part of you was already pulling it back. He tilted his head slightly. Imagine what happens when you stop doing that. Bruce found Harry at the edge of the Black Lake at dusk. The afternoon training had given way to Clark running Harry through scenario analysis, how to assess a situation quickly, prioritize threats, identify exits and allies and variables before committing to action. Harry had been faster at it than Clark had expected, which Bruce knew because Clark had told him with the specific excited quality his voice got when something genuinely surprised him, which was not as rare as Clark liked to pretend. The lake was still and dark, and the giant squid was somewhere in the depths doing whatever giant squids did in October. Harry was sitting on a rock, wand turning over in his fingers, watching the water. Bruce sat down on another rock a few feet away. They were quiet for a bit. This was one of Bruce's more functional social skills, the ability to be quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. Most people couldn't do it. They filled silence because silence felt like failure. Bruce had learned early that silence was often where the important things lived. Jayon told me about the mechanism, Harry said finally, the suppression reflex. He mentioned it. Is that why the spell signature from 1981 was so significant? Because it came through the restriction, Bruce looked at him steadily. What happened in 1981 was a rebounding killing curse. The energy that Shockwave released we're still not sure how to classify it exactly, but yes. The theory is that the magic which protected you, which is you in some sense, didn't pass through any learned restriction because it happened before you'd built any. Harry was quiet for a moment. So what I'm capable of without the restriction is what protected you from a curse that killed your parents. A pause. Yes. The lake moved slightly at its edges. Somewhere an owl was beginning its evening. Harry turned the wand over once more and then held it still. My aunt and uncle used to say I was dangerous, he said. Not with bitterness, just observationally, like he was examining something from a distance. They weren't entirely wrong. Being powerful isn't the same as being dangerous. Tell that to Voldemort's followers. They've been afraid of me since I was a baby. Voldemort's followers are afraid of power they don't control, Bruce said. That's different from being afraid of you. They're afraid of what you represent, an end to something they believe should continue. A pause. You're not dangerous, Harry, you're a problem. To people who have decided that a child dying is acceptable collateral, Harry looked at him. Really looked at him in that way he had of reading people, not calculating, just genuinely trying to see what was there. You know, Harry said, for someone who seems to be made of about 60% edges, you're actually fairly decent to talk to. Bruce held his gaze for a moment. The corner of his mouth moved approximately 2 millimeters in a direction that was not quite a smile but shared a genus with one. Don't tell anyone. Does Clark know? Clark thinks I'm secretly soft. He's been wrong about it for 15 years and shows no signs of updating his position. Harry laughed, real, unguarded, the kind of laugh that doesn't plan itself. He turned back to the lake. What do you think is coming with the tournament, the tasks? Someone with access to the tournament's internal mechanics and enough power to corrupt the goblet, Bruce said, returning to analysis because analysis was where he was most comfortable and most useful. That's not a casual achievement. It requires someone on the inside or someone with extraordinary capability, could be both. He paused. The first task is in 3 weeks. We don't have intelligence on it yet, but I have some ideas about how to get it. Breaking into somewhere, listening in on somewhere, different thing entirely, Harry smiled. Of course. He stood up, brushed off his jeans. I should get back. Ron and Hermione think I've been in the library all day. Are they? Trustworthy? Completely. He said it without hesitation. Hermione's probably the smartest person in the school. Ron, a brief, fond pause. Ron's stubborn and loyal, and when things get bad he doesn't run. He looked at Bruce. Can I tell them about you? Bruce thought about it. In his experience, expanding the circle of knowledge always expanded the risk. But it also expanded the resource base, and in a closed school environment, 2 students with access to the social networks and institutional knowledge Harry's friends had were not insignificant. Not yet, he said, but soon. If they're what you say they are, we'll need them. Harry nodded. Tomorrow morning again? Dawn, Bruce said. Harry gave him a look. 6 then. Bruce said nothing. I'll be here at 5:40, Harry said. He went back up toward the castle, hands in his pockets, and he walked differently than he had that morning, not taller exactly, more settled. Like something had shifted in the space he occupied and decided to take up the room it was entitled to. Bruce watched him go and thought about an 8-year-old boy in a mansion who had decided the only way to make sure he was never helpless again was to become everything, and a baby in a cottage who had, without choosing to, already become more. The 3 weeks moved fast and slow the way the weeks before something important always do. Fast in the room behind the tapestry, where Diana's training evolved from foundations into something that had Harry moving with a fluency that his Quidditch reflexes built perfectly on. His spatial awareness was exceptional, his balance was natural, and what he'd previously used only for catching a snitch he was learning to apply to the 3-dimensional problem of a real opponent. By the end of the 2nd week, he could keep Diana working for 4 minutes before she put him down, which she said was better than either of Clark's first months and considerably better than Barry's first year. Slow in the Great Hall, where the tournament loomed in every conversation and Cedric's easy confidence, and the Durmstrang students' calculated mystique created a pressure that Harry mostly ignored, because he had somewhere else to be at dawn and something real to be doing, and the tournament's social architecture seemed very small against it. The scar gave him nothing, no visions, no pain beyond the occasional dull ache. Voldemort was waiting too. Jayon worked with him every other afternoon, and the locked door, as he called it, didn't break open, nothing so dramatic. It was more like the old wood around it was drying out, the swelling going down, the mechanism beginning to work again the way it was built to. Harry's spells got sharper, got more. A repair on a broken chair became all 4 legs simultaneously replaced and the wood refinished and the jointwork improved on the original design. A simple Wingardium Leviosa in practice lifted not just the feather but every loose object within 6 feet briefly before Harry caught himself and let them settle. The first time he held back out of instinct, Jayon simply looked at him and said, "You contained it." "I know, sorry, don't apologize, notice it, that is different." Jayon paused. "Next time try not to." Hermione cornered Harry on a Wednesday 2 weeks in and told him she knew he wasn't spending all his free time in the library because she was in the library all his free time and he wasn't there. He met her in an empty classroom that night and told her about the League and spent 45 minutes answering questions that were more technically detailed and analytically precise than anything the League had asked themselves. At the end she said perfectly calmly, "I want to meet them." "Yeah," Harry said, "I thought you would." Ron, when Harry told him the next day, was quiet for a long moment that Harry had learned to read as Ron processing something that was exceeding his current frameworks. Then, "So there's a bloke out there who's basically indestructible. Superman, yeah. And a woman who's been training people to fight for 3,000 years. Give or take. And they came here for you specifically." They detected the signal from Harry. Ron looked at him with the expression of someone who has known his friend long enough to skip the explanation and get to the point. "Mate, they came across dimensions because you set off an alarm they'd been watching for 13 years. Does that not make you feel I don't know anything?" Harry thought about it genuinely. "It makes me feel like we should use the time we have before the first task," he said, "which is next week." Ron stared at him. "You're going to be unbearable after this, aren't you?" Harry smiled. "Probably." "Brilliant," Ron said, and he meant it. The night before the first task, Bruce found the information they needed. He didn't share how, he rarely shared methodology with people who didn't need it operationally, but he told Harry at 5:30 in the morning with the room empty except for the 2 of them. "Dragons." Harry went very still. "4 of them," Bruce said. "Each champion draws a miniature to determine which breed. The task is to get past one to retrieve a golden egg." He watched Harry. "Reactions?" Harry was quiet for a moment, not afraid. He didn't look afraid, he looked focused. "A dragon is a living creature," he said. "Flying, territorial, almost certainly using the egg as a trigger for nesting behavior. So it's not just aggressive, it's defensive. There's a difference." Bruce felt something very specific happen in his chest that he did not acknowledge. "Yes, there is. So the approach isn't to fight it." Harry was working it through out loud, and the logic was good, the analytical thread solid and moving quickly. "Fighting a dragon that's a terrible option even for dragon handlers. The approach is to remove myself as a threat to the egg while still getting close enough to retrieve it." "Or," Bruce said, "remove yourself entirely from the ground." Harry looked at him. "You fly better than anyone who's seen you has vocabulary for," Bruce said. The broom is the standard tool, but Diana's been working on the relationship between physical instinct and magical output. What do you think happens if you approach the problem of altitude without the broom as an intermediate? The room was quiet. Are you telling me, Harry said slowly, that you think I could? I'm not telling you anything, Bruce said. I'm asking what you think. Harry's eyes went to the middle distance in the particular way they did when he was running something through real consideration rather than performing it. Then he stood up, walked to the center of the room, and pointed his wand at his own feet. What followed was the kind of thing that, if anyone had been watching beyond the room's four walls, might have permanently altered the wizarding world's understanding of what a 14-year-old was capable of. Wasn't perfect, the first 3 attempts achieved elevation and then lost it. The 4th held but listed badly to the left. The fifth, Harry rose 6 feet off the ground and stayed there, and the expression on his face was not triumph. It was something quieter and more complete than triumph. Jaeon's going to want to see this, Harry said from 6 feet up, completely level, wand at his side. Jaeon's going to want to take notes, Bruce said. Harry looked down at him from the air. You knew I could do that, I suspected, before I did. That's usually how it works, Bruce said. From the outside, it's easier to see the shape of what someone is. He paused. From the inside, there's always more noise. Harry was quiet for a moment, floating. Then he looked at the high stone ceiling, and something in him opened up just slightly, just 1 degree wider than usual, the locked door's hinges accepting a breath of movement, and he rose another 4 feet, smooth and intentional. Tomorrow, he said from the air, I'm going to get that egg. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't bravado. It was a man, because in this room, in this moment, that word applied more accurately than boy, stating what was simply going to happen. Bruce Wayne looked up at him and thought, yes, you are. He did not say it out loud. But the not saying was in its own way the loudest thing in the room. Chapter 3. The weight of the sword. The dragon was a Hungarian horntail. Harry knew at the moment the miniature in his hand uncurled its tiny wings and showed him its spiked tail, black and vicious even at 3 inches long. The handler who'd passed him the silk bag had winced apologetically. Around him, Cedric had a common Welsh green, Crumb a Chinese fireball, Fleur a Swedish short snout. The horntail was broadly considered the most dangerous dragon in the world, and Harry had pulled it in front of a crowd of officials and champions and Ludo Bagman, who'd made a noise like he'd bitten something sour. Harry had looked at the miniature for approximately 3 seconds. Then he'd put it in his pocket and gone back to the tent. Ron and Hermione were outside the arena somewhere with the league. He knew that. He'd seen them cross the stands while officials were still ushering champions into the enclosure. He knew Bruce would be watching the structural layout, Diana would be reading the crowd for threats, Clark would have his eyes on the arena perimeter. Jaeon would be very still somewhere and very aware of everything. The knowledge of them was, he realized, different from any backup he'd had before. Not because they could intervene, they'd agreed they wouldn't, because this had to be Harry's and Harry needed to know it was Harry's, but because their existence behind him changed the texture of the moment. He wasn't surrounded, he was supported. The distinction was everything. A horn sounded outside. Cedric went first. Harry listened to the roar of the crowd through the canvas walls of the tent and didn't pace, which was itself a new thing. 6 months ago, he'd have been wearing a rut in the ground. Instead, he sat on a wooden bench and breathed the way Diana had shown him, not deep, theatrical breaths, but even ones, the kind that kept oxygen moving without telling the body to panic, and he thought about the horntail the way Bruce had taught him to think about problems. What does it want? It wanted the egg. The golden egg the task required him to retrieve was nestled among the real ones the dragon was guarding, and nesting behavior meant the dragon's entire priority structure was organized around a single point of vulnerability, which was also, Harry thought, a single point of leverage. A second horn. Fleur this time, based on the Beauxbaton's contingent surge of noise from the stands. What does it do well? Flame. Speed on the ground. Surprisingly, horntails were built low-slung, deceptively quick when charging. The tail was the signature danger, spiked and fast. The wings were primarily defensive but doubled as weapons. What does it do poorly? Altitude. Dragons flew, but horntails weren't built for sustained aerial maneuverability. They were built for power, not precision. Third horn. Crumb. The crowd's noise shifted character. Harry stood up. He pulled his wand and held it loosely at his side and felt the magic in him, not suppressed, not moderated, just present. The way Jaeon had helped him understand it in 3 weeks of careful, patient work. It was like standing next to something large that you'd previously been trying to pretend wasn't there, finally acknowledging its dimensions and finding that they were actually fine, actually useful. The fourth horn sounded and Harry walked out into the light. The horntail was enormous. Harry had known this intellectually and it hadn't helped at all. The dragon filled the arena the way weather fills a valley, not just occupying space but changing the quality of the air around it. heavy with heat and the smell of char, and something ancient and biological that had no name in the modern world. It turned its head toward him the moment he cleared the gates, and the yellow eyes tracked him with an attention that was not malicious. Malice requires a moral framework but was absolute. Harry stopped walking about 40 meters from it. The golden egg was visible between the dragon's foreclaw and a cluster of real eggs, mottled and enormous. The horntail shifted its weight and the ground vibrated. 40,000 people held a collective breath. Harry didn't raise his wand toward the dragon. He raised it toward himself. The spell he used was a modified version of Jaeon's exercise. Not Wingardium Leviosa applied to his own body, not technically that at all, but the underlying intent refined and directed through 4 weeks of unlocking something that had been compressed since he was small enough to fit under a staircase. The magic came out of him clean and sure and lifted him off the ground as simply as stepping onto a moving walkway, and the horntail's head snapped up, tracking the change in elevation, recalculating. 40,000 people stopped breathing. Harry rose to 30 feet, then 50. The arena's scope changed around him. He could see the full oval of it. The stands packed with color, the cluster of professors along one side, and there in the upper tier, 4 figures that didn't look like anyone else in the crowd because none of them were watching the dragon. All 4 of them were watching him. He was too far to see their faces properly, but he knew their postures, Diana forward, attentive. Clark still but alert. Jaeon simply present like a weather system. Bruce, arms folded, giving nothing away. Harry gave his full attention back to the horntail. From above, the geometry of the problem changed. The dragon's sightlines were primarily horizontal. It tracked at ground level because that's where prey was, where threat was. It was adjusting now, head tilting upward, neck craning with the obvious discomfort of an animal not built for looking directly overhead. The golden egg was still visible between its foreclaws. Harry angled himself in a long, smooth arc, not toward the egg, not yet, toward the dragon's side. He needed it to pivot. A pivoting horntail moved its foreleg to maintain balance, and a moved foreleg opened the space around the eggs. The dragon pivoted, exactly as he'd reasoned. He didn't telegraph the final approach. No wind-up, no visible preparation. He'd learned that from watching Diana until her movement patterns were built into his own observation. The understanding that the body announcing intention was the body surrendering advantage. He came off the arc and dropped into a controlled dive, fast enough that the horntail's tail strike, which came viciously fast, exactly as predicted, passed through air that Harry had already left, and he hit the space above the eggs at the moment the foreleg was displaced. His hand closed on the golden egg, and he was back up and climbing before the dragon's head completed its turn. The roar from the crowd was a physical thing. It hit him like a wave from 50 feet up, 40,000 people on their feet, and Harry spiraled upward in the clean October air with the egg tucked under his arm and felt something he hadn't felt in the arena. Something clear and uncomplicated that he didn't have a word for yet, but that lived in the chest and had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. He sat down near the judge's table, and the first person to reach him was Ron, which told Harry everything about how his friend had navigated the crowd to get there, because Ron had a talent for improbable movement when something mattered to him. "Brilliant," Ron said. He grabbed Harry's arm. "That was completely brilliant, Harry. You flew without a broom. How did you?" "Later," Harry said, grinning. "Tell you later." Hermione was a step behind Ron, and she didn't say anything, but the look on her face, equal parts relief and fierce, complicated pride, said considerably more than most people managed with words. The judges scored him. Maxime went highest, Karkaroff lowest out of spite, Dumbledore and Bagman somewhere in the middle. He was in first. He knew he was in first. He found he minded the number less than he'd expected, because the number wasn't the point, and he was clear enough now to know that. He found the league at the edge of the arena where the crowd thinned, and Clark said simply and warmly, "That was extraordinary," and Diana said, "The arc to force the pivot, whose idea was that?" And Harry said, "Mine," and she nodded once in a way that meant more than most speeches. Jaeon said nothing. But he met Harry's eyes for a moment, and Harry felt not words, not intrusion, just a kind of warmth that acknowledged something had been demonstrated today that was bigger than an egg retrieval. Bruce said, "Acceptable." Harry stared at him. "The dive angle could have been steeper," Bruce said. "You'd have had another half-second of margin on the tail." "I got the egg. You got the egg. Margin matters for next time." Harry held his stare for a moment, then he laughed, brief and exasperated. "You're genuinely impossible to impress." "I'm very easy to impress," Bruce said. "I simply don't perform it." He was impressed, Clark said to Harry. "He said the arc was clean when you pivoted the dragon. For Bruce, that's basically a standing ovation." Bruce said, "I will end your access to the Watchtower's coffee supply. You've said that 11 times. I mean it more each time." 2 days later, the Death Eaters moved on a campsite 3 miles from Hogsmeade. It wasn't a massacre, it was a demonstration. 6 families camping near the village for a Hogsmeade weekend found their tents destroyed and a symbol burned in the sky above them, green light in the shape of a skull with a serpent curling from its mouth. No fatalities, 3 hexed badly enough to need hospital treatment. The dark mark, witnesses called it Voldemort's sign, left not because anyone had been killed but because someone wanted the wizarding world to see it and remember that it was still possible. Bruce got the information from monitoring the Ministry's response through a combination of satellite imagery and a magical communication interception device he'd been developing since their second day in Scotland, which Jayon had improved considerably by simply listening to the frequencies involved and suggesting adjustments that Bruce had grudgingly admitted were elegant. He laid it out in the underground room that morning. Harry sat across from him, and Hermione was there. Bruce had agreed to her inclusion after the first meeting, which had consisted of her spending 45 minutes categorizing everything she knew about magical combat and cross-referencing it against the League's operational framework with an analytical precision that had made Bruce tell her she should consider intelligence work. "This isn't random," Harry said, looking at the satellite image of the burned dark mark. "Voldemort's hiding somewhere. His body is still barely functional from what we know. He can't just march into Hogsmeade. So why do it?" Hermione said. "The mark, why show it now?" Bruce said what he'd been thinking since he'd seen the report. "It's not for the public, or not only, it's for Harry." He looked at Harry steadily. "It's a message. I'm closer than you think. I'm already moving. Someone near the tournament is communicating with Voldemort's forces, and this is the response, a demonstration of reach, timed to coincide with Harry's first public performance." "To rattle me," Harry said, "to test whether you can be rattled. Your performance in the arena was public. Whoever is reporting to Voldemort reported it. This is the reply." Harry looked at the image. His face was still the way it got when he was processing something he intended to act on rather than simply feel. "So there's someone in the school." "Almost certainly. Or someone with access to someone in the school," Hermione said. She had a notebook open and was moving fast through it. "The Goblet of Fire was corrupted from the inside. Dumbledore confirmed someone with exceptional knowledge of the binding enchantments managed it. That person has to still be here. The tournament's not over." "Which means they're watching every task," Harry said. "Every movement." Bruce nodded. "Which means they're going to see what you are before Voldemort does and report it." Harry let that sit for a moment. Then, "Good," he said. Hermione looked at him. "Good. If they're watching me, I know where their attention is." Something moved in his eyes, not coldness but clarity, the kind that comes when you stop being afraid of being seen and start being interested in what being seen can do for you. "Let them watch, let them report. I want Voldemort to know exactly what's coming before it arrives." Bruce said nothing. But he was looking at Harry with an expression that was, on his face, equivalent to someone else standing up and applauding. Barry Allen arrived on a Wednesday at 3 in the morning. Harry was awake when it happened. He'd been awake since 1, running through the Golden Egg's clue, which was a screaming whale underwater that became, when opened beneath the lake's surface, a clear instruction about something hidden in the depths. He'd been sitting with the egg open in his bathroom with his head underwater in the sink, because Ron's snoring made any other approach impossible, when he'd felt rather than heard the dimensional bridge activate 2 floors below. He came down to the underground room in pajamas and bare feet, and found Barry Allen sitting on the floor eating what appeared to be 6 sandwiches simultaneously, and looking at everything in the room with the bright-eyed energy of someone who found the entire world perpetually fascinating. Barry looked up at him and said, with his mouth full, "You're shorter than the readings suggested." Who are you, Barry?" He swallowed and stood in a single movement that suggested his body operated at a slightly different relationship to time than most people's. He was tall, young-faced, with hair that looked like it had been in wind for a significant period and hadn't been fully briefed on the fact that the wind had stopped. "Barry Allen, the Flash. Bruce said I could come." He paused. "Bruce didn't say I could come. I told Jayon I was coming, and Jayon said, and I quote, 'If you have decided, then there is no productive argument,' which for Jayon is basically rolling out a welcome mat." Harry stared at him. "It's 3 in the morning. "For me it's been a very long Tuesday," Barry said, as though this explained it. "I had 3 separate weather emergencies on the eastern seaboard, a thing with a bridge, and a conversation with Oliver Queen that I don't want to talk about. Sandwiches." He offered one of the remaining 4. Harry took it because it seemed like the only logical response to the situation and sat down on the floor across from Barry, and they ate in the quiet of the underground room with the lights hummed low, and Harry said, "So you're fast." "Fastest man alive." "Fastest anything alive, really, but I don't say that out loud because it makes the others weird about it." He looked at Harry with unabashed curiosity. "You flew without a broom?" "Yeah." Bruce sent a report, very detailed. Tactically annotated. You know how when someone's trying to seem like they don't care about something but they write 6 pages of analysis about it? That's what the report was like. Harry bit back a smile. He said it was acceptable. He said, and I have the exact message. He said the arc was clean and the elevation approach was tactically sound and the timing on the dive was within acceptable parameters, though there's room for refinement. For Bruce, that's a love letter. Barry ate the last half of a sandwich in one movement. He doesn't give that kind of analysis to things he doesn't care about. He gives that kind of analysis to things he's invested in. A pause. Which includes you now apparently, so that's good, probably. Harry looked at him. Barry had the quality of people who talk fast and seem loose but are underneath the motion, paying extremely close attention to everything. What are you here for? Harry asked. Bruce has strategy, Diana has combat, Jayon has the magical work. Clark is the moral compass and the reminder that being powerful doesn't give you permission to be a jerk about it, which is important. I'm not diminishing that. Barry said, I'm here because of the clue. Harry looked at him. The egg, Bruce told me, something in the lake. Task 2 is underwater. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Here's the thing about speed. Everyone thinks it's about moving fast. It's not. It's about compressing the available time between stimulus and response. What takes a normal person 3 seconds to process takes me 3 milliseconds. The decision-making space is enormous. He tapped his temple. That's what I want to teach you. I'm not fast like you. But you can fly without a broom, which means your relationship between thought and physical expression of magic is already operating at a compression ratio most wizards never achieve. You're not slow, Harry, you're unoptimized. He grinned. It was a very good grin, open and genuine and incapable of being mistaken for anything other than what it was. Also, I know a lot about moving through water at stupid speeds which might be relevant. Harry considered him for a moment. You're not what I expected when Bruce said there were 4 of you. Nobody expects me, Barry said happily. It's one of my best qualities. The other is that I make excellent time on road trips. He stood, apparently finished with sitting. Come on. Let's go to the lake. It's 3 in the morning. The lake's great at 3 in the morning, very atmospheric. Also, the giant squid is less judgmental at night, I've found. Harry stared at him. Then he stood up, put on his shoes, and followed Barry Allen into the Scottish night at 3 in the morning, because some things defied conventional cost-benefit analysis. The lake at 3 in the morning was, as Barry had claimed, atmospheric. They sat at the edge and Harry opened the egg and the wailing filled the dark air and Barry listened with the focused attention of someone running audio analysis. And when Harry closed it, Barry said, Merpeople. Yeah, they have something of mine. Someone I'd sorely miss. Harry looked at the black water. An hour. We get 1 hour to find whatever it is. What do you know about gillyweed? Harry blinked. Hermione mentioned it once. Plant that lets you breathe underwater. 1 hour's worth? I think so. Okay, good, that's the practical solution and it's solid. Barry picked up a stone from the lakeside and turned it over in his fingers. But here's the thing about Task 2 that Task 1 didn't have. Task 1 was about you. The egg, the dragon, your own capabilities being the question. Task 2 is about something you care about. Something the tournament, or whoever rigged it, is using specifically because they know how you operate. Harry looked at him. They took someone. The clue says someone you'd sorely miss. That's deliberate language, designed to activate a specific response in you. Barry set the stone down. What's the response they want? Harry thought about it. Panic, rush, make mistakes. Right, so what's the actual response? Don't panic, plan, go in knowing the layout, knowing the time, knowing the variables. And the emotional part, Barry said, because this isn't theoretical, Harry, they're going to have taken someone real, someone you care about. You're going to see them down there and every instinct you have is going to say get them now, move now, everything else can wait. I know what that feels like. His voice had shifted slightly, not less warm but more honest, more personal. I've lost people. I know what it does to your decision-making when someone you love is in the frame. Harry was quiet. It doesn't go away, Barry said. The feeling, you don't logic your way out of caring about people, and you shouldn't, but there's a muscle and it is a muscle you can build it that lets you hold both at the same time. The feeling and the function, you care and you think, not one or the other, both simultaneously without one eating the other. The lake moved at its edges. A breeze came off the water. Who did you lose? Harry asked. Barry was quiet for a moment. My mother, he said. When I was 11, he looked at the water. I know what it's like to grow up with that shape missing. Harry said nothing because there wasn't anything to say and because Barry Allen, despite the sandwiches and the 3 in the morning energy and the grin that seemed to live permanently on his face, understood silence when it was the right language. After a while Harry said, Ron, it'll be Ron. He said it with certainty. He's my best friend, they'll have taken him. You sure? I know how I work, Harry said simply. Ron would be the calculated choice. If it's designed to hit hardest, it's Ron. Barry looked at him for a long moment. Then, okay, so you go in knowing Ron is down there, you know it ahead of time, that removes the shock. The shock is what costs you time. No shock means you stay in function mode from the first second. And if something goes wrong down there that I haven't planned for, then you adapt, that's the other muscle. Barry tapped his own chest. Speed is just adaptation with the wait time removed. You get better at adapting, the wait time gets shorter. Eventually they're nearly the same thing. Harry looked at him. You're actually quite good at this. Barry blinked, seemed genuinely surprised. Really? The teaching part. Barry sat with that for a moment, seemingly rearranging it into a position he could process. Cisco says I explain things by talking until they make sense, and sometimes it works. Who's Cisco? My partner. He's brilliant, he wanted to come. A pause. Bruce said number. Bruce says no to a lot of things. Bruce says no to most things and yes to the things that matter, Barry said, which is annoying, but it does mean when he says yes it means something. He stood, brushed off his hands. Okay, what do you know about the Akio charm? Harry looked up at him. Summoning, you specify an object and he stopped, stared at Barry. You can summon something from underwater. Barry pointed at him with the energy of someone who has been waiting for a specific piece of music to start. Bruce says the dive angle could be steeper. Say, why dive at all if you can pull the thing to you from the surface? A grin. Fastest solution isn't always the one with the most movement. Harry sat very still for a moment. Then he started to laugh genuinely from somewhere real at the elegant simplicity of it. He'd been thinking about the lake as a problem to enter when the egg could be a problem of extraction. That's obvious in retrospect. Everything is. That's the other thing about speed. Barry offered him a hand up. Go to sleep. Tomorrow Diana's going to do something terrible to your shoulder joints and you should be rested for it. Harry took the hand and stood. They walked back toward the castle in the October dark, and the lake sat behind them reflecting the stars. And somewhere in its depths the merpeople were going about their ancient business. And somewhere deeper than that, at the bottom of things, a 14-year-old boy who'd been afraid of his own dimensions was being slowly, deliberately, and irreversibly shown that those dimensions had no ceiling. 3 days before the second task, the rot Bruce had been looking for showed itself. He'd been running the intelligence analysis on the Death Eater movement near Hogsmeade, the campsite attack, the Dark Mark, cross-referenced against the tournament's internal records, which he'd accessed through methods he didn't discuss. The pattern that emerged was not subtle once you were looking for it, only subtle if you weren't. Every significant event in or around Hogwarts since term began had been preceded by a specific cluster of owl movements out of the castle, a routing pattern that suggested the owls were being intercepted and rerouted through a secondary location before reaching their destinations. Not unusual on its own. Unusual in the timing, the cluster always peaked 18 hours before each event. 18 hours before the Goblet Night. 18 hours before the Hogsmeade attack. 18 hours before the first task. And 3 hours ago the cluster had peaked again. Bruce brought Harry in that afternoon. Jayon was there and Hermione, who had been mainlining research on tournament history for a week and looked like she hadn't slept but whose eyes were completely sharp. Someone is communicating event timing to Voldemort's people, Bruce said. He put the data up on the display he'd rigged to the room's far wall. Someone with access to tournament planning, which is a closed circle. Dumbledore, the ministry officials, Bagman, Karkaroff, Maxime, and their immediate staff. Karkaroff, Harry said immediately. Almost certainly, Bruce confirmed. Former Death Eater bought his freedom by giving names. Multiple sources suggest his loyalty was transactional rather than ideological. He gave names to save himself, not because he'd genuinely turned. The pattern of owl activity traces to the Durmstrang ship. So he's passing information to Voldemort, Hermione said. Task structures, Harry's performance, movements. And the cluster peaked 3 hours ago, Harry said. He was looking at the data with the still focus he'd developed over weeks, reading it the way Bruce had been showing him to read information, not the surface of it but the shape. 3 hours ago, what event is 18 hours from now? Bruce held his gaze. I don't know yet, but it's during the second task. The timing strongly suggests it. The room was quiet. Jayon, who had been standing at the edge of the light, said quietly, "There's something else." He looked at Harry with the careful precision he always used when the information was personal. I've been listening to the castle's ambient, what we might call the emotional atmosphere of the school. There is someone here experiencing a very particular configuration of feeling, guilt, fear, and a specific kind of conflict, the conflict of someone who has committed to a course of action and is no longer certain they chose correctly. Karkaroff, Harry said, number someone else. Jayon paused. Someone closer to the tournament's English structures. I can't narrow the location further without looking more specifically, and I won't do that without significant cause and your involvement in the decision. The second task is in 2 days, Hermione said. If something is planned to happen during it, then we need to be ready for a second front, Bruce said. The task above water while something happens below it or parallel to it. He looked at Harry. You go in, you get Ron because it's Ron and you know it's Ron, which is your edge, you get him out fast. Diana and I handle whatever moves on the surface. And Clark, Harry said. Clark will be visible, Bruce said, a pause, deliberately visible. If something is planned, seeing Superman standing in the open air above the lake will significantly alter the calculus of whoever's about to act. You're using him as a deterrent. He agreed to it enthusiastically, Bruce said. Clark is very comfortable with deterrence when it prevents harm. It's a limited violence solution. He finds those appealing. Harry almost smiled. What about me? If someone moves during the task, you finish the task first, Bruce said, completely and cleanly, then we deal with whatever moved. He met Harry's eyes. In that order, don't let them change your priorities. Completing the task is completing the task. It's also demonstrating that nothing they plan can knock you off what you intend to do. That message matters. Harry looked at him for a long moment. You think like a general. I've had to think like a lot of things, Bruce said. General is one of the more useful ones. Diana thinks like a general too, but differently. Diana thinks like a warrior. Think like an analyst. A pause. The combination is what makes the League functional rather than just powerful. Harry considered this and then considered what it said about what the League had been doing for him, not just teaching him skills, but teaching him to be the combination himself. Combat and analysis, instinct and strategy, emotion and function both at once, the muscle Barry had described at the edge of the lake at 3 in the morning. Jayon, Harry said, the person you sensed, the guilt. Can you tell, is it active guilt, like they're about to do something, or retrospective? Jayon opened his eyes. He looked at Harry with something that might have been respect in a different expression. Active, he said, future-oriented, so they're going to do something during the second task. I believe so. Can you find them before then? A pause. If I expand my listening, it would require moving through the school, which risks detection. Do it, Harry said, not harshly, not with any particular drama. Just with the certainty of someone who has identified the next thing that needs to happen and is identifying it clearly. Jayon looked at him for a moment, then he nodded and moved toward the tapestry. Hermione was looking at Harry. You're doing that thing again, she said. What thing? The thing where you make decisions and they turn out to be the right ones and you don't seem surprised about it. She said it with a complicated mix of affection and something that might have been the slightly unsettled quality of someone watching the friend they've been quietly looking after discover that they didn't need looking after. I'm surprised sometimes, Harry said. When? He thought about it. When Barry showed up at 3 in the morning with 6 sandwiches. Hermione looked at him. Then she laughed, properly laughed, and the tension in the room eased by a fraction. And outside in the corridor, Jayon moved silently through the castle with his senses extended like hands reaching carefully into dark water, feeling for the shape of a specific guilt. He found it the next evening. The name he brought back to the underground room was one that made Hermione go very still, and Harry tightened his jaw once, briefly, and Bruce simply filed it with the efficiency of someone who has learned to process information without letting shock interfere with the filing. Bartemius Crouch Jr. Not dead as records suggested. Present, disguised. Moving through the castle in a skin that wasn't his, answering to a name that wasn't his, positioned precisely where he needed to be to influence every stage of the tournament. The pieces landed in order. Moody. Mad-Eye Moody, defense against the dark arts teacher, the figure who'd been present at every significant tournament moment, who'd encouraged Harry in ways that pushed him toward the tasks rather than away from them. The shape of it was elegant and terrible, not subversion from outside, but subversion wearing a trusted face. He's polyjuiced, Hermione breathed. He's been polyjuiced all year. That's how the goblet was corrupted. He had access, he was inside the school from day one. And he's the one whose guilt Jayon sensed, Harry said. The conflict of someone no longer certain they chose correctly, Jayon confirmed. He is deeply committed to Voldemort's ideology, but something in the recent weeks has introduced doubt, small but present. Harry looked at Bruce. Recent weeks. Bruce met his eyes. Yes. He's been watching the training, watching me, and whatever he expected to see, it's not what he's seeing. A 14-year-old who flies without a broom and fights like someone 3 times his age and training and doesn't look afraid of what's coming, Bruce said. Yes. That would introduce doubt into the calculations of someone who needed you to be manageable. What's his plan for the second task? Harry said. We don't know specifically, Bruce said, but given the pattern he's been steering, not sabotaging, every influence has been directional. He wants you at the third task, alive, which means his plan for the second task isn't to kill you, it's to continue the shepherding. A pause. Whatever waits at the end of the maze is what he's been building toward. The portkey, Harry said, or something in the third task, something that takes me to Voldemort. That's my working theory, Bruce said, which means the second task runs clean, Harry said. He doesn't interfere and we don't tip our hand yet. His eyes were very clear and very steady. We let him think we don't know, we let him keep steering, and we walk into the third task knowing exactly what we're walking into. Hermione stared at him. Harry, that's the play, Harry said. If we expose him now, Voldemort changes the plan, whoever's holding the real Moody dies, possibly. The path to Voldemort disappears. But if we know the destination and we know the mechanism, we control the arrival, Bruce said quietly. Harry looked at him. We control the arrival, he confirmed. The room was very quiet. Diana, who had been leaning against the wall through all of it with her arms folded and her eyes moving between each speaker, said softly, "You're not thinking like a student anymore." "No," Harry agreed. He looked at his wand on the table in front of him and at his hands around it, and at the room built in secret beneath the oldest school in Britain, lit by watchtower equipment and shaped by 4 weeks of people who told him the truth and asked his permission and treated the fact of him as a given rather than an inconvenience. "I'm thinking like someone who's going to end this," he said. "Not like a boy. Not like a symbol or a prophecy or a piece in someone's architecture of the long game. Like someone who had decided." The morning of the second task arrived gray and cold, and Harry walked out of the castle toward the lake, wand in his hand, gillyweed in his pocket, the name Ron Weasley in his chest like a compass needle. Below the castle, in a room that didn't exist on any map, Barry Allen ate breakfast very quickly and Clark Kent stood at the edge of the lake being visible on purpose. And Bruce watched 17 different streams of data. And Diana tested her bracers in the cold air and smiled the way she smiled before things became important. And Jayon looked at the lake and felt the deep cold of it, and the life in it, and the very old things living below the light, and the young and extraordinary thing about to go down into it and come back up carrying more than it went in with. As it always did, as it always would, the horn sounded. Harry went in.